The rain fell like acid on the broken landscape of Kepler 442b. Each drop hissing against the twisted metal remains of what had once been the greatest military installation in the Zephyrian Empire. Commander Sarah Chen pulled her environmental suit tighter as she surveyed the devastation through her helmet's display. 3 months had passed since the Zephyrians had retreated from this world, leaving behind nothing but scorched earth and the bitter taste of defeat. "Ma'am, we're picking up something on the bioscanners," reported Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, his voice crackling through the comm system. "About 2 clicks northwest of our position. It's big." Sarah frowned, checking her own readings. The Zephyrians had been thorough in their retreat, taking everything of value and destroying what they couldn't carry. The fact that anything living remained on this poisoned world was surprising enough. That it was large enough to register on their scanners from 2 kilometers away was downright alarming. "Could be a trap," warned Sergeant Kim Nakamura, the team's demolitions expert. The Zephyrians love their surprises. Sarah considered this as she watched the blinking dot on her scanner. The human expeditionary force had been sent to Kepler 442b to assess the damage and search for any useful technology the Zephyrians might have left behind. So far, they'd found nothing but radiation and ruins. This biosignature might be their first real discovery. "We investigate," Sarah decided, "but we go in cautious, full tactical formation." The team of 12 moved across the scarred terrain like ghosts, their adaptive camouflage suits shifting colors to match the ash-gray landscape. Sarah had handpicked each member of this reconnaissance unit for their unique skills. Rodriguez was the best tracker in the human fleet, while Nakamura could disarm Zephyrian explosives blindfolded. Dr. Elena Vasquez, their xenobiologist, had studied Zephyrian anatomy longer than anyone in human space. As they crested a low ridge, the source of the biosignature came into view. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat, despite her years of military training. In a crater that had once been a Zephyrian breeding facility, lay a creature unlike anything in the human databases. The beast was easily 30 meters long, its body covered in scales that shifted from deep purple to black depending on the angle of the dim sunlight. 6 powerful legs ended in claws that could tear through starship hull plating, while its elongated head featured a crown of bony spikes and eyes the size of dinner plates. But what caught Sarah's attention most was the creature's condition. It was dying. Massive wounds covered its flanks, and one of its rear legs was bent at an unnatural angle. Worse, heavy chains had been welded around its neck and legs, anchoring it to massive concrete blocks that had been cracked by the creature's struggles. The chains themselves bore Zephyrian military markings. "Jesus Christ," whispered Private Thompson, the youngest member of their team. "They chained it here and left it to die." Dr. Vasquez was already scanning the creature with her medical equipment. "Commander, this appears to be a Zephyrian war beast. I've read reports about them, but I've never seen one in person. They're bred specifically for combat, enhanced with cybernetic implants, and trained from birth to be living weapons." Sarah studied the creature more closely. Even dying and chained, it radiated a lethal grace that spoke of countless battles. The Zephyrians had a reputation for creating the most effective biological weapons in known space. This creature was undoubtedly worth more than most starships. "Why would they leave it behind?" Rodriguez asked, voicing the question that was on everyone's mind. "Because it's injured," Nakamura said grimly. "Damaged goods. Cheaper to abandon it than to transport it for medical treatment." The creature's massive head turned toward them, and Sarah found herself staring into eyes that held an intelligence far beyond that of any mere animal. There was pain there, yes, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just the desperate hope of a dying being. "It's conscious, Doctor," Vasquez reported, her voice filled with professional fascination and human sympathy. "Scans indicate extensive neural modifications. This isn't just a smart animal, Commander. This creature has been enhanced to near-sentient levels." Sarah felt a familiar anger building in her chest. She'd seen enough of Zephyrian cruelty during the war to know that they viewed all other life forms as expendable resources. But this seemed particularly callous, even for them. To create a thinking, feeling being solely for the purpose of warfare, then abandon it to die in agony when it was no longer useful. "Can we help it?" she asked. Dr. Vasquez ran more scans, her equipment painting the creature's body in various colored overlays. "The injuries are severe but not necessarily fatal. The main problem is those chains. They're designed to prevent any escape attempts. The metal is a Zephyrian alloy that would require specialized cutting equipment to remove. We have plasma cutters back at the ship," suggested Rodriguez. "That would take hours to bring here," Nakamura pointed out. "And we don't know if this thing will last that long." Sarah made her decision with the quick thinking that had earned her command of this unit. "Rodriguez, get back to the ship and bring the plasma cutting equipment. Take Thompson and Kowalski with you. The rest of us will stay here and monitor the situation." "Ma'am," Rodriguez said carefully. "With respect, staying near an unknown war beast might not be the safest course of action." Sarah looked again at the creature's eyes. Despite its fearsome appearance, she saw no malice there. Only pain, and perhaps a flicker of hope. "Sometimes safety isn't the most important thing, Lieutenant. Sometimes doing what's right matters more." As Rodriguez and his team departed for the ship, Sarah ordered the remaining soldiers to establish a defensive perimeter. Dr. Vasquez continued her scans, while Sarah found herself drawn closer to the chained creature. "Easy," she said softly, not sure if the being could understand human speech, but hoping her tone might convey peaceful intentions. "We're going to try to help you." The creature's massive head tilted slightly, and Sarah could swear she saw understanding in those alien eyes. One of its front claws moved slightly, scraping against the concrete anchor, and Sarah realized it was trying to point at something. Following the creature's gaze, she spotted a series of wounds along its left flank that seemed different from the others. These weren't battle injuries. They were precise, surgical cuts. Someone had been experimenting on the creature while it was chained and helpless. "Doctor," she called, her voice tight with controlled fury. "You need to see this." Dr. Vasquez joined her and immediately began scanning the surgical wounds. Her face went pale behind her helmet's visor. "Commander, these cuts were made recently. Within the last few days, someone was conducting medical experiments on this creature after it was wounded and chained." The full scope of Zephyrian cruelty became clear to Sarah in that moment. They hadn't just abandoned a wounded war beast. They'd used its helpless state as an opportunity for vivisection, treating a sentient being like a laboratory specimen. "Those bastards," muttered Sergeant Williams, who had overheard the conversation. "Even for Zephyrians, that's cold." Sarah felt her resolve harden like steel. The Zephyrians had created this creature to be a weapon, enhanced its intelligence to make it more effective, then tortured it when it could no longer serve their purposes. But humanity would be different. They would show this being the compassion its creators had denied it. "How long until Rodriguez gets back with the cutting equipment?" she asked. "At least 2 hours," Williams replied. "Maybe 3, if they run into any problems with the ship's systems. 2 hours might be too long." The creature's breathing was becoming more labored, and its scales had taken on a grayish tinge that Dr. Vasquez said indicated severe blood loss. They needed to act faster. Sarah activated her personal communicator and opened a channel to the ship. "Bridge. This is Ground Team Alpha. I need you to contact Fleet Command and request immediate assistance. We need a medical transport with full surgical capabilities." "Commander," came the reply from their ship's captain. "We're in hostile space with limited backup. Requesting additional resources might compromise our mission." "Captain Morrison," Sarah said, using her most authoritative tone. "I'm invoking emergency humanitarian protocols. We have a sentient being in critical condition, and we have the capability to save its life. That makes it our responsibility." There was a long pause before Morrison responded. "Understood, Commander. I'll send the request, but it'll take at least 6 hours for any support to reach us." 6 hours was definitely too long. Sarah looked at the dying creature and made another command decision. "Doctor, what do you need to stabilize it until help arrives?" Dr. Vasquez consulted her medical equipment. "I can treat the blood loss and pain with modified human medical supplies. But those chains are cutting off circulation to its extremities. If we don't remove them soon, it might lose a limb even if we save its life." Sarah activated her suit's emergency beacon. sending a priority signal to any human ships in the system. If there were any closer vessels, they might be able to provide faster assistance. As she waited for a response, she noticed the creature watching her with what she could only describe as gratitude. "We're not giving up on you," she told it, placing her gloved hand gently on its massive snout. "Humans don't abandon our own. And right now, you're under our protection." The creature's response surprised everyone. It made a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground, and its massive head pressed gently against Sarah's hand. Dr. Vasquez checked her equipment frantically. "Commander, that sound it made. It's not in any Zephyrian warbeast files I have access to. This might be something entirely new." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's cold atmosphere. If this creature was a prototype or experimental model, the Zephyrians would definitely want it back, which meant their rescue mission had just become much more complicated. Her communicator crackled to life with an incoming message from an unknown source. "Human vessel. This is Zephyrian command ship Retribution. You are trespassing in former Imperial territory. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Sarah's blood ran cold. The Zephyrians had returned, and they were undoubtedly here for their abandoned war beast. She looked down at the creature, which had lifted its massive head and was staring at the sky with what could only be described as fear. "Not happening," she muttered, then activated her team's emergency channel. "All units, this is Commander Chen. We have incoming Zephyrian forces and a critically injured sentient being that cannot be moved. We're making our stand here. Prepare for defensive operations." As her team scrambled to set up defensive positions, Sarah remained beside the chained creature. Whatever happened next, she was determined that this being would not fall back into Zephyrian hands. Humanity had spent too much of the war seeing the worst of what intelligent species could do to each other. Today, they would show what the best looked like. The Zephyrian dropships descended through Kepler 442b's poisoned atmosphere like metallic vultures, their engines screaming against the thin air. Sarah watched them through her rifle scope, counting at least 30 heavily armed soldiers disembarking from each of the 4 vessels. The odds were not in humanity's favor. "Commander, we've got movement on all fronts," reported Sergeant Williams from his position behind a collapsed wall. "They're surrounding us." Sarah checked her ammunition counter and grimaced. Her team of 8 remaining soldiers had enough firepower for maybe 20 minutes of sustained combat against regular infantry. Against Zephyrian shock troops, they'd be lucky to last half that long. "Doctor, how much longer do you need?" she called to Dr. Vasquez, who was still working frantically to stabilize the warbeast. "The bleeding is under control, but those chains are still cutting off circulation," Vasquez replied, without looking up from her medical scanner. "Every minute we delay increases the chance of permanent damage." The warbeast itself seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Despite its injuries, it had raised its massive head and was tracking the movements of the Zephyrian forces with predatory intensity. Low growls rumbled from its throat, and Sarah noticed that its claws were extending and retracting in what looked like nervous anticipation. A booming voice echoed across the battlefield as one of the Zephyrian commanders activated an amplifier. "Human soldiers, you are in violation of Imperial salvage rights. The creature you are protecting is valuable Zephyrian property. Surrender it immediately, and you will be permitted to leave unharmed." Sarah activated her own communicator and broadcast her response on all frequencies. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Human Expeditionary Force. We reject your claim. This sentient being was abandoned to die, making it fair salvage under interstellar law. More importantly, we don't negotiate with torturers." The reply came in the form of plasma fire that lit up the battlefield like a deadly light show. Sarah's team returned fire from their makeshift defensive positions, but it was clear they were outgunned and outnumbered. "Ma'am," called Private Fisher from her position near the creature's head, "I think our friend here wants to help." Sarah looked where Fisher was pointing. The war beast was straining against its chains, not in an attempt to escape, but trying to position itself to face the attacking Zephyrians. Its eyes burned with hatred directed not at the humans who were trying to save it, but at its former masters who had abandoned it. "Can we remove even one of those chains?" Sarah asked Dr. Vasquez during a brief lull in the fighting. The front left leg restraint is damaged from the creature's struggles, Vasquez replied, examining the chain with her scanner. If we could apply concentrated plasma fire to the weak point, it might break. Sarah made a tactical decision that would have horrified her commanding officers. Williams, focus your plasma rifle on the damaged chain link. Everyone else, provide covering fire. Ma'am, Williams protested. Freeing a war beast in the middle of combat might not be the best idea. Sarah looked into the creature's intelligent eyes and saw something that convinced her she was making the right choice. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts, Sergeant. And my instincts tell me this being knows who its friends are. Williams directed his plasma rifle at the specified chain link while the rest of the team laid down, suppressing fire. The Zephyrians advanced steadily, their superior numbers and equipment allowing them to maintain pressure despite the humans' defensive positions. The chain link heated to white-hot temperatures under Williams' concentrated fire, and the war beast seemed to understand what was happening. It pulled against the restraint with careful precision. Not the wild thrashing it had exhibited earlier. The damaged link stretched, glowed brighter, and finally snapped with a sound like thunder. The creature's left front leg was free. What happened next would be talked about in human military academies for generations to come. The war beast, despite its severe injuries, moved with fluid grace that demonstrated why the Zephyrians had valued it so highly. Its free claw swept across the battlefield, striking a group of advancing soldiers with such force that their armor crumpled like paper. The creature's roar shook the ground and sent several Zephyrians stumbling backward in obvious fear. Holy shit, breathed Private Fisher. It's fighting with us. The war beast's intervention created exactly the chaos Sarah had hoped for. The Zephyrian advance faltered as their own weapon turned against them, and several soldiers actually retreated despite their officers' shouted orders. The creature's presence on the battlefield changed the entire dynamic of the fight. Sarah seized the opportunity. Nakamura, can you get to the next chain? The demolitions expert studied the situation and nodded grimly. The right front leg restraint looks vulnerable, but I'll have to get close. Really close. Do it. Everyone else, keep them off her. Nakamura sprinted across the open ground, while her teammates provided covering fire. Plasma bolts sizzled past her head, but the war beast's massive body provided some protection as she worked on the second chain with a plasma cutter. The creature seemed to understand her intentions and held perfectly still despite the weapons fire around them. As Nakamura worked, Dr. Vasquez made a discovery that changed everything. Commander, these cybernetic implants in its brain, they're not just for enhancement. There are control mechanisms. The Zephyrians have been forcing this creature to fight against its will. Sarah felt sick as the implications hit her. You mean it's been a slave this entire time? Worse than a slave, Vasquez replied, her voice heavy with disgust. The neural interface allows them to override its natural behaviors and instincts. They've been using technological mind control to force it into combat. The second chain snapped under Nakamura's plasma cutter, freeing the creature's right front leg. Now with both front limbs mobile, the war beast became even more effective in combat. It moved like liquid lightning, its massive claws carving through Zephyrian battle armor, while its intelligent eyes tracked multiple targets simultaneously. Sarah watched in amazement as the creature demonstrated tactical awareness that rivaled her best soldiers. It used the terrain to its advantage, positioned itself to protect the human defenders, and even seemed to coordinate its attacks with their weapons fire. This wasn't just a smart animal fighting on instinct. This was a brilliant military mind that had been trapped in an enslaved body. This is incredible, Doctor, Vasquez said as she monitored the creature's neural activity. The control implants are failing as we free it from the chains. It's regaining autonomy for the first time since its creation. A new transmission crackled through the communications system, this time with barely controlled rage. Human Commander, you are making a grave error. That creature is programmed to kill all sentient life when fully autonomous. You are dooming yourselves. Sarah glanced at the warbeast, which had just carefully moved one of its massive claws to shield Dr. Vasquez from incoming fire. I don't think so, she replied. I think you programmed it to kill. but you couldn't program out its capacity for gratitude. The battle raged for another 20 minutes as Nakamura and Williams worked to free the creature's remaining restraints. Each freed limb made the war beast more effective in combat, but more importantly, Sarah could see its personality emerging as the control systems failed. The cold efficiency of a programmed weapon was being replaced by something more complex and nuanced. When the final chain snapped, the transformation was complete. The war beast stood at its full height for the first time in months, stretching muscles that had been cramped and constrained. Then, it did something that surprised everyone on the battlefield. It looked down at Sarah and made that same rumbling sound they'd heard earlier. Dr. Vasquez checked her scanners and gasped. "Commander, I've analyzed that vocalization. It's not a threat sound or a battle cry. It's a thank you. The creature is saying, thank you." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes behind her helmet visor. Here was a being created to be nothing more than a weapon, subjected to torture and abandonment, and its first act upon gaining freedom was to express gratitude to those who had helped it. The war beast turned toward the Zephyrian forces with renewed purpose. But now it wasn't fighting as a slave following commands. It was fighting as a free being choosing to protect those who had shown it kindness. The difference was remarkable. The Zephyrians' advanced positions crumbled as the creature moved among them like an avenging angel. Its massive size and enhanced reflexes made it nearly invulnerable to their weapons, while its freed intelligence allowed it to outmaneuver their tactical formations. Within minutes, the attacking force was in full retreat. "Commander," came an urgent transmission from Captain Morrison aboard their ship. "We're reading massive energy signatures approaching from the outer system. It looks like a full Zephyrian battle fleet." Sarah's heart sank. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Zephyrians clearly valued this creature more than she had realized, and they were bringing overwhelming force to reclaim it. She looked up at the war beast, which was now standing protectively over the human position. Its intelligent eyes met hers, and she saw understanding there. It knew what was coming just as clearly as she did. "Doctor," she said quietly, "how long would it take to remove those control implants completely?" Vasquez consulted her medical scanner. "Several hours of delicate surgery. The implants are integrated into its neural tissue. One wrong move could cause permanent brain damage or death." Sarah activated her communicator and opened a channel to the approaching Zephyrian fleet. When a voice answered, she spoke with absolute certainty. "This is Commander Sarah Chen. I want to speak to whoever's in charge of this operation." A moment later, a new voice came through the communication system, speaking with the cold arrogance typical of Zephyrian nobility. "This is Admiral Thex Carr of the Imperial Fleet. You have stolen valuable Imperial property and will return it immediately." Sarah looked up at the war beast, which was listening to the conversation with obvious interest. "I'm looking at a sentient being that you created, enslaved, tortured, and abandoned. That doesn't sound like property to me. That sounds like a person." "That creature is a weapon," Thexkar replied coldly. "It has no rights under Imperial law." "Maybe not under Imperial law," Sarah said, making the most important decision of her military career. "But it does under human law. As of this moment, I'm granting this being political asylum in human space. Any attempt to reclaim it will be considered an act of war against a human citizen." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah had just extended human citizenship to an alien war beast, potentially starting an interstellar incident that could reignite the war between their species. But as she looked into the creature's grateful eyes, she knew she had made the right choice. Humanity had always prided itself on protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Today, they would prove that principle applied to all sentient life, regardless of species or origin. The tension in space above Kepler 442b was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Admiral Thexkar's fleet hung in the void like a collection of predatory insects, their weapons powered and targeting systems locked onto the small human research vessel below. But Sarah Chen had played her diplomatic card, and now both sides waited to see how the game would unfold. "Commander Chen," Admiral Thexkar's voice carried barely controlled fury. You cannot grant citizenship to Imperial military hardware. That creature was created by Zephyrian biotechnology and remains our property regardless of your sentimental human notions. Sarah stood beside the warbeast, one hand resting on its massive scaled flank. She could feel the steady rhythm of its breathing, proof of life that no amount of Zephyrian legal arguments could dismiss. Property doesn't say thank you, Admiral. Property doesn't make tactical decisions to protect those who show it kindness. What you call hardware, we call a person. Dr. Vasquez had continued working throughout the diplomatic exchange, carefully mapping the neural implants that had enslaved the creature for its entire existence. "Commander," she said quietly, "I'm reading something interesting. The control implants aren't just suppressing its free will, they're also suppressing its natural communication abilities. This being was designed to be telepathic." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Telepathic abilities would make the creature incredibly valuable to any military force. But they also suggested a level of consciousness far beyond anything the Zephyrians had admitted. "Can you free those abilities?" "I can try," Vasquez replied. "But it would mean removing the primary control node. If I make a mistake, the neural feedback could kill it." The warbeast turned its massive head toward Dr. Vasquez, and Sarah could swear she saw understanding in its eyes. It knew what the doctor was discussing, and it was willing to take the risk. The choice between continued slavery and possible death wasn't really a choice at all. "Do it," Sarah said, as Dr. Vasquez began the delicate process of disabling the neural implants. Sarah's communicator crackled with a new transmission. This time, the voice was human and familiar. "Sarah, this is Admiral Harrison aboard the UES Defiance. We received your asylum request, and we're backing your play. You've got the entire Third Fleet dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds. Sarah felt a surge of relief as human warships materialized around the Zephyrian fleet. The Third Fleet wasn't as large as Admiral Thexkar's force, but they were commanded by Admiral Jessica Harrison, the most respected tactician in human space. More importantly, they represented humanity's commitment to protecting the principles Sarah had invoked. "Admiral Harrison," came Thexkar's cold voice, "this is an internal Imperial matter. Your interference will not be tolerated." "Admiral Thexkar," Harrison replied with cheerful menace, "my scans indicate a human citizen in distress on the planet below. Protecting our people is exactly the kind of business humanity takes very seriously." Sarah smiled as she listened to the exchange. Admiral Harrison had served with her father during the First Zephyrian War, and the older woman had a reputation for creative interpretations of military law when it served a just cause. Dr. Vasquez's equipment hummed as she worked on the creature's neural implants. "Almost there," she muttered, sweat beading on her forehead despite the planet's cold atmosphere. "Just a few more connections to sever." The war beast remained perfectly still during the procedure, though Sarah could feel tension radiating from its massive body. Whatever pain it was experiencing from the surgery, it endured without complaint. The trust it was showing in these strange aliens who had freed it from its chains was both humbling and inspiring. "There," Dr. Vasquez said finally, stepping back from her equipment. "The primary control node is disabled. If this creature has natural telepathic abilities, they should be returning now." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Sarah heard something that wasn't quite a voice. More like thoughts that had somehow become audible inside her mind. "Asterisk. Thank you. Asterisk," the presence said, and Sarah realized she was hearing the war beast's first free thoughts in its entire existence. "Asterisk, I remember. Before the chains, before the pain, I remember who I was meant to be. Asterisk." Sarah gasped as images flooded her mind. Not her own memories, but those of the creature she now knew was much more than any war beast. She saw a world of crystalline cities and beings of incredible beauty, a civilization that had valued art and philosophy above warfare. She saw the Zephyrian invasion that had destroyed that world, and the horrific experiments that had followed. Asterisk. My people called themselves the Kethmari. Asterisk. The mental voice continued. Asterisk. I was not born to be a weapon. I was born to be a guardian. a protector of those who could not protect themselves. The Zephyrians stole that from me, but you have given it back. Asterisk. Dr. Vasquez staggered as the telepathic contact reached her as well. Commander, I'm reading the creature's true memories. The Zephyrians didn't create this being. They captured it as a juvenile and modified it through surgical and cybernetic enhancement. This is genocide, not just slavery. Sarah felt rage building in her chest as she understood the full scope of Zephyrian crimes. They hadn't just enslaved a war beast, they had destroyed an entire species and perverted the survivors into weapons against their will. The being beside her wasn't just a victim of cruelty, it was possibly one of the last survivors of an extinct civilization. Asterisk, not extinct. Asterisk, the Kethmari corrected, somehow sensing her thoughts. Asterisk, hidden, scattered. The Zephyrians think they killed us all, but some survived. Some still fight. You have given me hope that my people might be found and freed. Asterisk. Admiral Thexkar's voice cut through the telepathic contact like a blade. Commander Chen, you have precisely 10 minutes to return our property before we open fire. Your Admiral Harrison may have more ships, but we have superior firepower. This will not end well for either of our species. Sarah looked up at the Kethmari, whose massive head was now held high with newfound dignity. She was about to ask what it wanted to do when the creature made the decision for both of them. The Kethmari's telepathic voice suddenly expanded beyond Sarah's small team, reaching out across space to touch every mind within range. Zephyrian and human alike suddenly found themselves experiencing the being's memories directly, the pain of enslavement, the joy of freedom, and most importantly, the gratitude it felt toward those who had risked their lives to save it. On the Zephyrian ships, soldiers who had been told they were reclaiming valuable property suddenly realized they were being asked to re-enslave a sentient being who had committed no crime except being born different. On the human ships, crews who had followed orders without question suddenly understood exactly what they were protecting. Asterisk, I choose humanity. Asterisk, the Kethmari announced to every mind it could reach. Asterisk, not because they are perfect, but because when they saw suffering, they chose to stop it. When they found cruelty, they chose to show kindness. When they had the chance to walk away from someone else's pain, they chose to stay and help. Asterisk. The effect on both fleets was immediate and dramatic. Several Zephyrian ships powered down their weapons, their crews apparently unwilling to continue the mission now that they understood its true nature. On the human side, Admiral Harrison's voice carried new determination as she addressed her Zephyrian counterpart. Admiral Thexkar, you've heard from the being you're claiming as property. It has made its choice freely, and we will respect that choice. Any attempt to take it by force will be met with the full strength of the human fleet. But Thexkar was not deterred by mutinous crews or moral arguments. Sentimental fools. That creature is worth more than your entire fleet. If you will not return it willingly, we will take it by force. The first Zephyrian ship to open fire was Admiral Thexkar's flagship, its massive plasma cannons sending bolts of superheated energy toward the human vessels. But before the shots could find their targets, something extraordinary happened. The Kethmari, despite its injuries and exhaustion, reached out with its telepathic abilities and touched the minds of every gunner in the Zephyrian fleet. For just a moment, each soldier experienced what it felt like to be a free being, choosing to protect those they cared about, rather than a slave following orders. The effect was subtle but decisive. Targeting systems that should have been perfect suddenly developed minor errors, and shots that should have been lethal became near misses. The human fleet returned fire with precision and determination, but their target wasn't the Zephyrian crews who were beginning to question their orders. Instead, they focused on the command systems and weapons platforms, disabling rather than destroying whenever possible. Admiral Harrison's tactical brilliance became evident as the battle progressed. Rather than trying to win through overwhelming force, she orchestrated a campaign designed to minimize casualties while making Thexkar's position untenable. Human ships used their superior maneuverability to stay ahead of Zephyrian weapons while targeting specific systems with surgical precision. The turning point came when 3 more Zephyrian ships powered down their weapons and began transmitting surrender signals. Their crews, influenced by the Kethmari's telepathic contact, had refused to continue fighting for a cause they now understood was morally bankrupt. Asterisk. Do not let hatred consume you as it consumed my captors. Asterisk. The Kethmari projected to all minds in range. Asterisk. Choose to be better. Choose to show mercy, even to those who have shown you none. Asterisk. Admiral Thexkar's rage was palpable even across the vacuum of space. Cowards and traitors. That creature has poisoned your minds with alien thoughts. No, Admiral, came a reply from one of his own ship commanders. It has reminded us that we have minds of our own. As more Zephyrian ships stood down, Admiral Thexkar found himself increasingly isolated. His flagship continued to fire, but its shots were becoming increasingly desperate and poorly aimed. The battle was effectively over, though the Admiral seemed unwilling to accept defeat. Sarah watched the space battle from the planet's surface, but her attention was focused on the being beside her. The Kethmari was weakening from the effort of maintaining telepathic contact across such a vast area, and Dr. Vasquez was monitoring its vital signs with growing concern. Asterisk, I am tired. Asterisk, it admitted privately to Sarah. Asterisk, but I am free. For the first time in my life, I am truly free to choose who I want to be and what I want to fight for. I choose to stand with those who believe that every sentient being deserves dignity and respect. Asterisk. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face inside her helmet. What happens now? Do you want to come with us? Asterisk, I want to help you find others like me. Asterisk, the Kethmari replied. Asterisk, there are more Kethmari hidden throughout the galaxy, and countless other species suffering under Zephyrian oppression. Together, perhaps we can free them all. Asterisk. Admiral Harrison's voice crackled through the communicator with news that would change everything. Commander Chen, Admiral Thexkar has agreed to a ceasefire. It seems several of his ship commanders have decided to defect to our side, bringing valuable intelligence about other Zephyrian prison worlds and experimental facilities. Your new friend started something bigger than any of us imagined. Sarah looked up at the Kethmari, whose eyes now burned with hope rather than pain. The creature that the Zephyrians had created to be their perfect weapon had become something far more dangerous to their empire, a symbol of resistance and proof that even their most oppressed victims could find freedom. As human medical ships descended to provide proper care for the Kethmari's injuries, Sarah realized that this rescue mission had become something much more significant. They hadn't just saved one being from a terrible fate. They had discovered a new ally in the fight against oppression, and possibly found the key to liberating countless other victims of Zephyrian cruelty. The war beast that had been left to die on a poisoned world would soon become the catalyst for the greatest liberation campaign in galactic history. And it had all started because a human commander had decided that sometimes doing the right thing was more important than following orders. Humanity had always prided itself on protecting the innocent and fighting for justice. Today, they had proven that those principles extended beyond their own species to encompass all sentient life. In a galaxy often dominated by cruelty and oppression, that commitment to universal compassion would become their greatest strength.